Welcome to our session on hazardous materials. The key concepts that we will explore together are an introduction to hazardous materials, and I will give you a list of chemicals to avoid and explain a little bit about the effects on the environment and human health, and also talk a bit about personal protection equipment or PPE and safe working conditions when working around some of these very harsh chemicals. There are a myriad of toxic chemicals in our fibers. From the agricultural stage to the final product, our garments are mostly made in chemically intensive processes. In the costume department, we use harsh chemicals to dye, launder, and distress garments. And these chemicals are not only harmful to the planet and biodiversity, they also cause detrimental health issues over time. Some are so harsh they can bioaccumulate and be passed down intergenerationally. And if you want to know more about how some of these chemicals get accumulated in the body and actually are passed down from the mother to the child intergenerationally, there's a really good book called Plastics, A Toxic Love Story, where she talks about specific chemicals that the plastic industry uses and various case studies that have been done as to the health effects to babies that have been exposed to PVC, for example, which is one of the most toxic chemicals. And you can relate that in the fashion industry to vegan leathers or sort of any vinyls and vinyl covered textiles. If you want to dive even deeper into some of the agricultural chemicals and processes, you can read and or listen to Silent Spring. Both of those are fantastic resources. I just wanted to start this session with a little reflection that you can use pen and paper to write something down or journal or make a collage or just go through these in your head. But what chemicals are you exposing yourself and your team to? Do you know them specifically? Do you know their names? Do you know their derivatives? Like, are they fossil fuel based? What kind of synthetics are they? Are they mostly dyes? Are they mostly plasticizers? Are they mostly casting agents? Are they mostly acrylic paints? Explore a little bit deeper and write down any personal protection equipment that you already use in your workplace, maybe any specific workplace safety conditions that you can think of that are already set up in your production. And if you want to go a little bit more in depth into this exercise, I would suggest that if you are somebody who works with chemicals already in a production setting, that you go into your chemical cabinet and read through some of the material safety data sheets or through some of the labeling on these chemicals and write down any information that you may not know that may be novel to you about the effects on human health and the environment that may be there as a warning. Let's go through our list of best practices. Especially these are important if you work in a show that has a high level of breakdown, a high level of costume builds, and that you need to use a lot of paints and chemical agents to be able to achieve costume looks. So set a communication strategy to outline sustainability intentions and goals within the department and do that prior to the run of the show. This will really help get everybody on the same page when it comes to sourcing chemicals, how to store them, and how to dispose of them. Do some trainings. This is normally a requirement for a lot of productions, but if it's not for yours, then be proactive. There is here in Ontario the Occupational Health and Safety Act that you can get certified through about the different use of materials and workplace safety and hazards. And you can also download a guide on workplace safety from your Ministry of Labor and take a WMIS course. Know your MSDS sheets. So every time that you source a chemical component and you have that in your workspace, print out all of the safety precautions and all of the material safety data sheets and have them all together in a binder for future reference and for people who have not used that before to become familiar with what those products are. Use paints and dyes that carry low volumes of volatile organic compounds. So that is a lot of the off-gassing materials. Avoid ozone-depleting aerosols and synthetics. Avoid burning toxic chemicals. Instead, if you're trying to create a burnt look, you can actually create that with various paints. If you must burn something that is very toxic, like some types of silicones and casting agents, then make sure that you're doing that in a ventilated space or outside. Limit the amount of hazardous materials purchased. That's rule number 1. And conduct a daily maintenance inspection. So make sure that all of the materials that do have volatile organic compounds, for example, are stored safely in a cabinet, and that all of your HEPA filters or whatever else you're using, flow hoods, are working properly so that every day you come into a safe working space. Avoid using carcinogenic toxic chemicals for aging and use instead acrylic paints to achieve the look, or natural dyes. That's preferable if that's in your practice. Use natural powders like borax, citric acid, mineral salts, and natural dyes and fixers that you can get from any natural dye store, from Etsy, or here in Canada, for instance, we have Euale. They have a huge range of products that are ready to use. So that includes tinctures, that includes all the mineral salts and pH modifiers, all the mordants, and you can look on there and see how all of those work together if that's something that you want to incorporate into your practice. Just as a side note, if that's something that you're taking on, this means that you will be needing to work with more natural fibers as well. So it all is a loop that feeds into each other. Find better casting agents, for instance, natural rubbers, and use pine-based silicone resins for building. For instance, there is a company called Entropy Resins that has really fantastic technologies made from tree resins, and using natural rubbers rather than synthetic ones. Source a natural stage blood. One that is often used is Ben Nye, which is corn syrup based. But you can also create your own if that's in your scope of practice and you want to have consistency of color and texture through the run of the show. Make sure you actively use the hazardous waste bin and seek a vendor that has hazardous waste bin drop off, or make a system where there's a pickup that happens at your production. You can also donate some of these materials, so identify donation recipients and their locations for specific materials. For example, unused paints and art materials, you can donate to crafting hubs, but call in advance and inquire about their pickup or drop-off requirements. Let's look at some of the chemicals that we play with a lot or come into contact even without knowing, and what some of their impacts are, just to get a better understanding and a better scope of why this is so important. So all of these are from a fantastic resource, Fibershed. It's an organization, but also this woman wrote a book called Fibershed, and at the end she has a large glossary of chemicals that are involved in the textile industry from the time of the seed through all of the agricultural and harvesting processes to the manufacturing, to production, and then to their contact on your skin, and what some of their pervasive effects are on the environment, but also on human health. We'll start with phthalates. They're frequently used to make plastic softer, and among other applications include plastic inks for textile screen printing. PFCs have a water and oil repellent qualities and are often used for stain and grease proofing garments, carpets, and leather products, as well as creating durable water repellent gear like raincoats and jackets. Glyphosate is known to disrupt human cells within 24 hours of exposure in sub-agricultural doses, which is quite small. Due to these endocrine disrupting properties, glyphosate increases breast cancer cell proliferation in the parts per trillion range. NPEs are synthetic So human-made chemicals that are used as stabilizers and emulsifiers in plastics and are widely used in detergents, as well as surfactants for textile manufacturing. BPA as well. This one you may be familiar with because there has been a huge push to ban that from plastics production. So often when you buy plastics, if they don't contain BPA, they actually will say so. They'll say BPA free. Synthetic dyes. Approximately 10,000 different synthetic dyes are used on our garments, which include aniline or azo dyes, both of which, if you're a dyer or work in the breakdown room, often you will be familiar with. They have both been shown to be carcinogenic and mutagenic, which means they disrupt the DNA in a cell. Some of them are bioaccumulative, meaning that they get stored in our tissues and they will never be flushed out, even through time. So this is why they also get passed down intergenerationally. There are some of these chemicals that have had case studies where the chemical has been banned in a region and 30 years later is still found in those next generations. Although they haven't been coming into contact with those chemicals, they have been passed down through blood lineage because it has been stored in the tissues of the people who were working in close contact with those chemicals. Next, we have DMF, which is a compound utilized in the creation of human-made, so again, synthetic acrylic fibers, which is mutagenic properties lead to breast cancer in women. Brominated flame retardants, while being banned from many governmental bodies due to their biologically persistent nature, bioaccumulative, are still relatively low cost and ubiquitously used where they are still legal. In time, they become particulate matter in household dust, and then they are inhaled by humans. Antimony trioxide is our last compound, which is used as a catalyst in the production of polyester fiber and is often used in combination with the brominated flame retardants. So that is a bomb right there, no pun intended with the flame retardants. This is why it's really important if you are one of these artisans or crafters working on these specialty costumes, you're coming into contact with dyes on a regular basis, you're coming into contact with reactive casting agents or catalysts and all kinds of other chemicals on a regular basis, that you know your rights. So again, going back to researching the Ministry of Labor, taking WMIS courses or Health and Safety Act courses and getting certified so that you have that as a backup when something is not up to standard in your workplace conditions. Also, it is your right to ask for personal protective equipment, PPE, which I think by now everybody's really familiar with, like masks and gloves, but we also have a larger list depending on what it is that you're working with. It can be less severe and it can be more involved. PPE can protect you against chemical and physical hazard exposure. It is important to be aware of the hazardous materials that you're working with because that way we can adjust the PPE accordingly. Personal protection equipment includes eye protection, includes gloves, maximum skin coverage, so full hazmat suits, closed-toe shoes, aprons, respirators, splash shields, earplugs, and specialized gloves. Also important to note that you should know how to use some of this equipment. For instance, respirators need to be taken off every 20 minutes or so. So you need to go to an area that has fresh air and be able to breathe without a respirator on for a little while. Otherwise, that's doing more harm to your system. So take care of your body. What we're doing is art. It's supposed to be fun and it's supposed to connect us to other human beings, not destroy the planet and ourselves while we're doing it. Important to know your local recycling programs. Here are some resources. Some of these you'll have to research in your own city, depending on where you're located. Firstly, reiterating to seek less impactful material options and make sure they're properly disposed of. And to do so, find your hazardous waste material program in your city. Here in Toronto, for instance, we have the household hazardous waste reuse centers that allow residents as well as industry to drop off and pick up unused paints, oils, cleaners, and other products. And we also have the Green for Life program, which is a government funded program, and it safely removes and properly recycles or disposes of outdated chemicals and reagents from institutions. You can also look for Waste Management Company. This is the WM logo that you see on the bottom right-hand side. Thanks for joining me. I hope this was insightful and it sparked in you a deeper interest about chemistry, environment, and your own health and safety. I'll see you in the next one.